on this afterwards, as the storm broke around your head, you must have been thinking, well, I wonder whether that was really complying with the guidance. That must have occurred.
So, Bernard, forgive me, but I've got to correct you on a point of a technical point. After June the 24th, 2020, the guidance was changed so that the objective was to maintain social distancing at 1 metre with mitigations where 2 metres were not viable.
I'll come to that. But I think the first point is that it's fair to say that you didn't say that we did every effort to comply with the guidance of the House of Commons, and you didn't say that...
No, I'm saying that we followed the guidance completely. No. Because you can't...
okay, right.
We'll come to this in a minute.
Okay.
But you can't expect human beings in an environment like number 10 to have, as it were, a invisible electrified fence around them. They will occasionally drift into each other's orbit. When I saw that, it did not mean to me that we had breached the guidance. It meant that we were following the guidance to the best of our ability, which was what the guidance provided for. And the guidance provides for freedoms within the practical framework of the operation or the business to decide how you're going to implement the guidance. The measures that you referred to at the outset are things that need usually to be complied with. Businesses are entitled and asked to decide what practical considerations they wish to give to implementing the guidance, and that is what we did. Can I just say, so people understand why I believed, because this is the crucial thing, if I may say so, why I believed when I stood up on December the 1st that the guidance was followed completely at all times in number 10. What picture I had in my head, and why that doesn't conflict with that picture. The answer is that I knew from my direct personal experience that we were doing a huge amount to stop the spread of COVID within the building. We had sanitizers, we had windows were kept open, we had people working outdoors wherever they could, we had Zoom meetings, we had restrictions on number of people in rooms, we had perspex screens between desks, and above all, as I said, we had testing, regular testing, which went way beyond what the guidance prescribed, and which in my view helped mitigate the difficulties we had in maintaining perfect social distancing.
Right. I'm bound to say that if you'd said all that at the time to the House of Commons, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But you didn't. And the question is about what the guidance actually says. And I noticed you taking a little advice at that point on the question of the guidance. Can I just read to you, it's on page 6 of the bundle, what the guidance actually says. You must maintain social distancing in the workplace wherever possible. Where the social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full in relation to a particular activity, the businesses should consider whether that activity be redesigned to maintain a 2 metre social distance, or 1 metre with risk mitigations where 2 metres is not viable. And the mitigating actions include using screens or barriers to separate people from each other. So where in the picture are there screens or barriers?
There were screens or barriers in the, I believe, in the adjacent press room from memory. Well, this is an impromptu gathering at which I'm thanking staff, at least one member of staff, for his contribution during COVID. I believe it was an important part of my job to do that. That was the best place to do it. I accept that perfect social distancing, Sir Bernard, is not being observed, but that does not mean that what we were doing, in my view, is incompatible with the guidance. The guidance specifically allows for workplace freedoms to decide how to implement it, and the operative conditional is where possible. Now, do not for one moment believe that people in number 10 did not operate social distancing, because they did, and they took they made great efforts, in my view, to my memory, to stay apart from each other. But that didn't mean that they were able to stay apart from each other the whole time. That's what I'm saying. Well, that did not conflict with the guidance.
Nobody is devaluing the efforts of anybody in number 10 during the COVID, including you, by the way. and the public service you gave during your period as Prime Minister during the pandemic. All we're asking is to, I'm afraid, it's our obligation.
I'm trying to explain to you why I said that the guidance was followed.
I'm halfway through a question. All I'm saying is that we've got to find out, establish in our minds, whether what you told the House of Commons was strictly accurate. And the guidance goes on to say, where social distancing guidelines cannot be followed in full, even through redesigning a particular activity, businesses should consider whether that activity needs to continue for the business to operate. And if so, take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission between the staff. Now, nobody is disputing that it's the right thing for you to thank your staff. The question is whether what you said about this particular way of thanking your staff in the House of Commons was strictly accurate. And indeed may have been misleading. That's what we're asking.
Well, I don't believe for a second that it was.
The guidance does not say you can have a thank you party and as many people in the room as you like if you think it's very important to thank people. The guidance doesn't say that.
Let's just go back over that. I believed that this event was not only reasonably necessary, but it was essential for work purposes for the reasons that I have given. I've described the constraints in which we were operating in number 10. If you wanted to have a rapid gathering to thank people, this was the place to do it. There aren't, in fact, that many people there. I accept, though the pixelation makes it difficult to work out exactly who is where. I accept that perfect social distancing
is not sure.
The unpixelated
sure,
but the public can't see that.
Yeah.
The public can't see that.
Yes, but that's
Bernard, I accept that not everybody is perfectly socially distanced in that picture, but that did not mean to me, when I stood up in the House of Commons and said that the guidance was followed completely, I was not thinking of that event and thinking that somehow that contravened the guidance. Absolutely not.
Okay.
We were making a huge effort to follow the guidance. That was my memory, and that is why I said what I said.
This is exactly the purpose of this session, that you can make the case that you're making. Can we move on to examine the compliance with the COVID rules at this gathering? As we heard in the clips earlier, you told the House the rules were followed at all times, so you must have thought the gathering was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as was then required by the regulations. We know that the gathering attracted fixed penalty notices. So in fact, the police have judged that it broke the rules. Why did you think it was within the rules?
I thought it was essential for work purposes, or at least reasonably necessary for work purposes, because for the reason I've given, Sir Bernard, that November the 13th was a day in which two senior officials, senior advisors in government, had left their jobs in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. And it was necessary to steady the ship. It was necessary to show that there was no rancour, that the business of the government was being carried on. That's what we had to do. That's what I had to do.
I know that, but it's what you said about it to the House of Commons is what matters. We know it was a leaving event for a member of staff. The photographs we've just seen do not seem to show any actual work being done. Why did it not occur to you that it at least might have been in breach of the regulations, or at least because it was not reasonably necessary for work purposes?
Did you say, did it occur to me that it might not be reasonably necessary for work purposes?
Yes.
No, it didn't occur to me for 1 second that it wasn't reasonably necessary for work purposes.
To do it in that particular way and then say that particular thing about the way that event was actually carried on.
And I really, to this day, and as I said earlier on, I struggle to see how I could have run number 10, run hundreds of officials who needed to be thanked and appreciated for their work in very trying circumstances without having brief farewell events of a kind that, at least insofar as my participation was concerned, did not fall foul of the rules. I just remind you of that key point about that event. I was not. I was there for a maximum of 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I think. I gave a short speech.
Could I cut in at
what
this
I did
point?
was not found to have been in
Mr. Johnson,
breach of the rules.
could I cut in at this point? Because how long you were at the gathering is not a question
I understand
that Mr.
that.
Jenkin,
I understand
that
that,
Sir
Chair.
Bernard is asking you. And while I'm interjecting, you raised the question of imperfect social distancing. Social distancing, hands, face, space, which is the spaced part, is either 2 metres at this time, or it's 1 metre with mitigations.
2 metres where possible.
2 metres.
2 metres where possible.
2 metres or 1 metre with mitigations, which is screens.
It doesn't say 1 metre where possible. It doesn't say that.
The objective of social distancing is to maintain social distancing wherever possible. That's what it says.
So what is the notion of a less than perfect, an imperfect social distancing?
Yeah,
because you were telling
yes.
the country to do social
Yes,
distancing.
but so did we in number 10. And